Good evening. This is John Milburn for Laws 12062 Alternative Dispute Resolution. This is week 12, our final week in Term 2, 2018. This week, in fact in 2 days, I'll release the take-home examination. That is, I'll release the take-home examination on Wednesday the 3rd of October at 6:30 p.m. You have until 11:45 p.m. on the following day, Thursday the 4th of October, to submit your work. Please prepare your work in Word format, not PDF, and upload your work through Moodle in the usual manner under Assessment 3, Take-Home Paper. For those of you who always present your work on time, I'm sure you'll be able to fulfill that commitment once again. For those that do have a habit sometimes of being a little late with the work, please bear in mind two things. The first is that there is no grace period at all. Second is that there's no opportunity to present your work at a later time unless you have a pre-approved extension. I can't grant extensions for take-home papers. That needs to go to the Deputy Director of Learning and Teaching, I think is the right designation. So that involves quite a procedure. The basic rule is do the work, present it on time, and everyone's fine. The take-home paper that I've set is not particularly difficult. You are required from memory to write 2,000 words, and you have two questions, not one, two questions. Those two questions will be drawn from the three areas of practice that I mentioned to you most recently in communications. But bear in mind that when you look at those three areas of practice, you need to consider always legal issues and ethical issues that might apply. So the first question requires you to write up to 1,400 words. The second question requires you to write up to 700 words. Now, I appreciate that doesn't add up to 2,000 words. The rationale behind that is, for example, if you use 1,200 words in the first part, then you've got a few more words at your disposal in the second, and vice versa. So that's why the individual components are a little over the total. You can write up to 2,200 words if you really need to in total, so that there is some flexibility that I provide. However, once you go over the word limit, I start to look at whether you use the words efficiently. I start to look more closely at your sentence structure, for example, to ensure that you are not that you're writing in the active voice and you're writing in a straightforward manner. If you go beyond 2,200 words, then I do start to penalise you in terms of this logic that it's not fair for others in the class that have restricted themselves to a word count to allow you to go beyond that. So in terms of answering the questions that I have prepared for you, I do want you to take a practical type approach. In other words, many of the questions that I set are aimed at a knowledgeable audience, if you understand what I mean. So sometimes I'll set a question saying, you're now in a first year in a law firm, please write some form of memorandum to one of the senior partners. So you don't have to go into explaining the basics. There's a tight word count, so you're expected to move straight into the substance of the question and answer the substantial issues. In other words, I don't need a lot of background. If you do provide material by way of background or expansion, or you're referencing material generally, then I do allow some flexibility in the use of footnotes. Now, bear in mind, these are things that I might allow, and you can't assume by any means that other unit coordinators adopt the same process. So we're all slightly different in that regard. So I'm doing the best to explain, I guess, my philosophy behind this. Also, for example, if you quote a reasonably large passage from some external material, then generally I don't include that in the word count. So on the face of it, the word count might go a little over, but if I see that there is extensive quotations in a block I'm really talking about, then I won't include that notionally. But don't overdo it, because then it hardly becomes your own paper. It starts to look like you're adopting simply something that somebody else said substantially. My approach to practice and my approach to studies is similar in that in law we do adopt a very collegiate approach. I encourage you to adopt the collegiate approach to your studies as well. And that means that I encourage you to collaborate in terms of assessment work. That's not collusion. You can't directly plagiarize from each other. Anything that you provide must be your own work, but I'm more than comfortable in you discussing it amongst yourselves or with others to get a feel for the way that the answer might be structured. Now, I know that's going into dangerous territory, because you might say, well, I'll just get someone to provide all the answers and I'll just reword it. That's not what I mean. It's by collusion, I'm talking about something along those lines. Collaboration is an exchange of ideas, not going into specifics, and providing you with an opportunity to think about the assessment from a number of perspectives. So Nicholas, I think, has organised a Zoom session. I won't attend, but I do encourage students to attend that session. And Nicholas, thank you for organising that. I think that's on Wednesday evening. Is that correct?
Yeah, I've set it about half an hour to an hour. I can't remember exact time without looking. I think it's 7 or 7:30. I'll need to double check, but it is set. Gives people enough time to preview the paper and then sort of come up with any questions they may have, and we can discuss possible information as to where people may go and find. 7:30. So Diane's got it. It just gives people a chance to, as I said, read over the paper and then think about any information they need to know. And then as a group, we can sort of work out where they may be able to find that information. It's not about giving them direct answers. It's about just pointing them in a general direction.
Absolutely. So thank you. And I hope that works well. Now, when you're writing your assessment work for the take-home paper, the usual rules about preparing an assignment apply. So footnote referencing, using reasonably straightforward language where you can. I like to describe that generally as short sentences, active voice. But as we become more familiar with that style, I should indicate that I'm very happy for you to expand on that and to vary the length of the sentences so that it adds a little more flair to your writing. I don't say that lightly. Usually in first year, second year, I'm saying short sentence, active voice, because where people do make mistakes in their writing, it's generally because the sentences are far too long, convoluted, they seem to just flow on forever, and they're written in the passive voice. So to break that down, that's when I have this almost mantra, short sentences, active voice. But now that we're used to that, and I know that collectively your work is very good, I don't mind if you add a little flair to that by changing the length of the sentences to add a different flow. I hope that makes some sense. With your work, make sure that you analyse the question and directly answer the question. You don't have room to go much beyond that. Do you feel the ability to be flexible in your presentation and be creative to some degree? So if you feel that answering the question is best suited to adding in some flowcharts, lists, diagrams, things of that nature, then feel free to do that. But always do it in a professional manner. And I guess you can look at the way textbook writers generally introduce that type of work if they believe it's appropriate and necessary. With the take-home paper, you have 29 hours or thereabouts to complete the task. You won't need all of that time. So you can still sleep, you can still eat, you've got some time off. I expect that you could probably complete the task in about 3 hours, but I'm sure that many people will go beyond that, and you're welcome to if you like. But do make effective use of the time. If when you look at the paper you feel that a bit overwhelmed, you don't know where to start, it's always important to get something down on paper and start working through some notes and dot points and then flesh it out from there. So try to map out your answer. You can use IRAC, issues, rules, application, and conclusion. But I say that guardedly because I think a question answered strictly in IRAC is not a particularly good way of answering a legal question. I know that's what we teach you in first year, but it's more to give you an idea of legal thinking rather than a strict formula to be applied in all circumstances. But if you're writing an answer, generally you'll have some sort of introduction, then the body, then the conclusion is probably a more logical way of thinking about writing an essay style or a problems response rather than strictly IRAC. But keep IRAC in the back of your mind in terms of a way of legal logic. Again, if you're a bit stuck, comfort yourself on the knowledge that of two things. The first is there is not necessarily a right or wrong answer. That gives you a lot of freedom because it might be your approach to the problem, may be entirely different to mine, doesn't mean that you're wrong. This is not science, or if you like, an exact science. And the second is that the first 50% of marks you'll obtain far more easily than the second percent, it's 50%, and the most difficult 20% will be that final 20% if you're shooting for the HD type mark. Make sure that you write professionally, watch your grammar, spelling, punctuation. You have an opportunity to proofread. You can have someone proofread for you if you like, but don't ask them to get involved too much in the process. It's not a session where you're asking others to do the work for you. Or you can use a program to have this text converted to voice, and you can hear what you've written. Sometimes it's a way of picking up on something that you can't see. I don't know, if you're like me, you might look at something a few times and not pick it up. Sometimes if you've got time, you can write the material, let it sit for an hour or two, come back to it, and then make sure that, and look at it with slightly fresh eyes is another way of doing things. But do take care to proofread, because I still pick up a lot of errors, and in part that's annoying, but also if it's a little persistent, it does affect your mark. So professional presentation, logical thinking is all part of the assessment. Now, I know I'm doing a lot of talking, and tonight is really more a drop-in session rather than any fixed lecture. I have no new material that I want to cover. So do we have any questions about the assessment, about the unit generally, about anything that might be on the take-home exam? All good? All right. So please remember to have your say. As I mentioned earlier, it is important for the university, and it's certainly important for me. So if you could take some time to provide university feedback, the big red button on the top left-hand corner, I would appreciate that greatly. Now, has anyone got any questions, comments? I take it you all know what the take-home exam may be drawn from. All good?
Just have probably a very dumb question, sorry. I have in my notes from a couple of weeks back, I just have written down Justice Act, Section 53 and Section 88(1)(b). But what is the actual name of the Act?
It'll be the Justices Act, Queensland.
Okay.
I forget the year. It's very old.
Oh, okay.
But the Justices Act. I can't, just off the top of my head, I can't recall the specific sections that you mentioned, but what they are. But it would be the Justices Act.
Okay.
And Justices Act deals with summary matters, magistrates' court matters.
Okay.
All right. No, that's not a dumb question. Thank you, Diane. Nothing else? All right. Well, look, that then brings us to the end of the unit. Thank you very much for your participation. Sometimes this is a very short final session, as it is going to be this evening. So for those of you that are continuing with other studies beyond Thursday, all the best for those studies. And if you're doing other work with me this unit or next units in the future, it'll be nice to see you again. So all the best. I'll wrap up for this evening, and good luck with your take-home exam. Bye then.